My name is Jenna Smith, and I am 83 years old. I've lived through a lot of changes in the United States and have been very active following and supporting social issues. This all began when I was in high school. It was well, my junior year in high school. I sat next to a wonderful singer, and she was Black. Her name was Verdell Myers. And one day I forgot my lunch, and Verdell said, "Come to my house. I live near the school, and I'll share my sandwich and a Coke with you." So I went into the section of town that was segregated. This was in Malvern, New York, right out on Long Island. And I saw how Verdell lived and the ramshackle homes that were so close to each other that they almost could share their peeling paint. Verdell and I sat on a table that had one shortened leg and was rocking, and we had lunch together, and after that, she sang for me. And it was an incredible experience. The most beautiful, beautiful contralto voice. I tell you this because Verdell had to leave high school before she graduated because her mother needed her to be earning money, and she ended her life working in a laundry with the hot suds, while I, as a white, talented singer, went to Juilliard. That was my first big lesson in what was happening in the United States. In high school, my senior year, I questioned why there was a part of town that was segregated and only for Blacks, and there were the rest of Lynbrook and Malvern were only for whites. My father even said to me, don't ask any questions because you don't want to rock the boat. But when I was assigned a paper for my senior year in high school, I wrote about this problem that everyone was separated. Even in high school, although in the chorus we came together to sing, in the halls we walked separately, we never sat together. I handed in my paper questioning why this was so, and my social studies teacher, who was a Southerner, called me into his room, took my paper, tore it up and scattered the pieces on the floor and said, "You write something else by tomorrow morning or I fail you and you are not going to graduate." My God, I understood this must be a very touchy subject. Mm-hmm. I graduated from Juilliard, getting a good part of my master's degree there as well, and went on tour with the Robert Shaw Chorale, where I met my husband, who was playing the timpani in the orchestra. We toured down south and up into Canada and across the United States. In our tour down south, there were 3 Black people in the chorus. They couldn't stop at rest stops where we did. The bus driver had to take them to a separate place. They couldn't drink in the same fountains. They could not stay in the same hotels. So the chorus was always split. Mm-hmm. Robert Shaw was a minister's son, and he had strong feelings about this. So even though in the concert we sang the Bonnie Blue Flag, which was the Southern national anthem, still we knew that appearing on a stage with a mixed chorus, both of Black and white, we could be arrested. So what Robert Shaw did was, instead of following the usual procedure, he came on stage with the chorus and had a downbeat immediately so that the concert was already taking place before the people in the audience could react to see that we were the first group to have Black and white performing together.
Mm-hmm.
Peter and I came back from the tour, and he was drafted, and we spent some time in Germany, and we were also there during the Nuremberg trials. And when the Americans were holding the trials in Nuremberg, the German people wouldn't walk on the same sidewalk with me because I was an American, and they put garbage on the back of our car because we had American license plates. There was a lot of anti-Americanism there. We came home and we lived on Riverside Drive. We both had strong feelings about integration. We lived in an area that was very, very integrated with a Hispanic, Black, lots and lots of students from Juilliard, Columbia, Barnard, the Protestant Theological Seminary, the Jewish Seminary. So we were in a very integrated area.
How did your parents react to what was going on? Did they have any reaction, or were they advocates at all?
My parents were not advocates. My father was a conservative Republican, and during the whole civil rights period, and when I was growing up, my early thing, they did not want to discuss anything. They, as I said before, did not want to rock the boat. Don't ask questions. Don't create problems. Don't support anything. Don't talk about it. My father felt that no one needed any help, that what should happen in the country is that they should pull up their own bootstraps and, be able to help themselves. Who needed to help any other race? So my parents were very against any support of civil rights or social issues.
Did you ever find it unusual, considering Baba's background, that he was considered a minority as well, being Jewish?
I think that was the reason he didn't want me to raise any questions, because he felt that it would react badly for him, although my father did not confess that he was a Jew until I was well in my 30s. They told us the first year that I and Peter were living at a home of our own in New Rochelle. Living in New York, we decided that we needed to move into the suburbs, and we looked for an integrated area. There weren't any. In Westchester, barely any place had accepted integration. We finally found a place called Glenwood Lake, which was in New Rochelle, and we moved there. On the day that we moved into New Rochelle, CBS was forming a TV program called Segregation Northern Style, following a Black family who could not move into all sorts of white areas and were given all silly excuses why they were not welcome. I want to say one more thing, though, because there was block busting going on whenever a Black family moved into a neighborhood. The real estate people would try to then say that the neighborhood was not good for white people anymore, and all of the house values were going to go down, and therefore they would try to have everybody in that neighborhood who was white sell because a Black family was there. I became part of the people who showed houses in Glenwood Lake to make sure that Black families and white families both had the opportunity to buy a house there. And not only that, but we wanted to disprove that a neighborhood was going to go down because a Black family moved in. So we would invite friends and drive them through the streets saying, all right, tell us which houses are the Black families. And of course, you couldn't tell anything at all because everyone in Glenwood Lake kept their houses very well repaired. The lawns were beautiful, the gardens were lovely, and there was no indication that the real estaters had anything that was truthful to base their blockbusting on. So, since we were a white family moving into an integrated area where everybody else was moving out and trying to destroy those neighborhoods, they contacted us to film our moving day. There were cameras all over the lawn, trucks all over the place with the CBS people.
The interesting thing about it to me is that over these years, numbers of white families have continued to move in.
This white family, Mr. and Mrs. Peter A. Smith and their son Jerry, moved into a house on that very block just last August. Peter Smith, a systems engineer for IBM, moved to the Glenwood Lake neighborhood from an apartment in New York City. His wife Jenna told us why.
When we looked for a house, we wanted to find a place that offered an integrated neighborhood and not only an integrated school. We never thought we'd find it, though. We came about looking for the integrated school, and in the paper we saw this particular house, and then we found out that the neighborhood was integrated. The school is a lovely school. We fell in love with the house. It's close to my husband's work, and we liked the feeling of stability about this neighborhood.
There were several white families, and it was nicely integrated in the fact that
Right.
we were all represented.
How was life different than when
Life was different because, well, we joined into the in this civil rights movement, really joined it, and marched with the people in Selma on the streets, Papa carrying our little boy Jerry on his shoulders, people throwing rotten vegetables and fruit at us, and we holding hands with our neighbors singing "We Shall Overcome." We also did a major fundraising for the March in Selma. And in the houses of New Rochelle, all the three other women and myself made chicken dinners and sold them, and people came to our houses, and I had the program of protest songs which we gave at our house. Peter was very worried that all the people were going to be in our living room.
Yeah, I was afraid the floor would collapse. So I installed a couple of lolly columns in the basement to support the floor.
But we raised $1,800, which we sent to Martin Luther King. Our lives in New Rochelle actually were very, very lovely. The people around the corner cleaned our sidewalk when it snowed. The day we moved in, a mixed couple from across the street said to us, "Come and share barbecue with us. We know you have no food in the house. We have it all ready. You don't have to stay. We know you're tired. Just come and eat." And we did. There was so many elements of lovely neighborhood. We used to sit around each other's fireplace and talk. The young Democrats of New Rochelle were initiated in our living room on Store Avenue.
Yeah.
Our children went to Daniel Webster School, which was an integrated school and a very safe and lovely school. Problems arose with the high school because in New Rochelle, you had to bus to go to the high school, and there were a lot of poor people living in projects, and the buses were not safe. We worried about Jerry going to the high school. Someone in New Rochelle burned the high school down. You know that in New Rochelle. They burned it down. And for a while there were Quonset huts there. Because of that problem and the fact that we were now sponsoring an opera company, we decided we had to leave Glenwood Lake, which was painful for us because we loved that place. So we came here to Edgemont. Our experience in Edgemont was very interesting. Edgemont was an all-white school, and we moved into what was then an all-white neighborhood. A neighbor called us very welcoming. Oh, we have to come and bring you a jar of jelly, and I will come and visit you, and what do you think of our wonderful high school? And I said, it looks lovely, but I don't see a black face. She never came, she never brought the jelly, and she never spoke to me again. Later on, Edgemont became an integrated school in the fact that there are many Japanese here, there are Latinos here, and there are a few black families here. But at that point, it was not true. So we went from one extreme to another extreme, which made us somewhat unhappy. We were a very close community until the movement of Black is Beautiful. And then again, another reason for us moving was that the neighborhood, the tight tweed that we had been, began to unravel.
Mm-hmm.
As the blacks in Glenwood Lake pulled away from the whites.
Yeah.
They wanted to become a separate but equal kind of neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
where the people who lived there, the black people who lived there, wanted to have equal status, equal looking houses, equal value
But they
to the
did.
whites, but they didn't want to be as socially integrated as they once were. When we moved into the neighborhood, blacks and whites were socially integrated, and that social integration began to fall apart shortly before we left. The other thing is that the elementary school, was a neighborhood school. And because the neighborhood was integrated racially, the school was automatically integrated. And that was great as long as our kids were in that school. But once they had to go to the middle school and the high school, that integration began to fail. Well, my name is Peter Smith. I'm 82 years old. My family was not really a very tolerant kind of family. I have unfortunately learned all of the derogatory terms for minorities from my family, which use those words frequently in their conversations. And of course, when I was growing up, and I mean from 2-3 years old on up to I guess high school, I was exposed to these terms and the feelings that some of these people were inferior, and disturbed me, but I was never in a position to do anything about it. I was not an activist when I grew up. I wasn't an activist in high school, certainly, and nor was I an activist in college. I think that my tolerance for minorities and other races and other creeds is based upon being with Jenna and learning that people who are members of other races and other religions are just as good as I am, and in many ways superior intellectually and physiologically and so forth. that intolerance is just a bad idea. So I just, you know,
Did you ever agree in high school with what your family was saying about minorities, or did you?
there was never any discussion that I recall in high school
Mm-hmm.
that had anything to do with minorities. I went to a high school, Stuyvesant High School, back in the 40s and 50s, and Stuyvesant was a school that you had to take a test to get into.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the premier high schools in New York City and probably the country. And unfortunately, in the high school, I can recall only one black boy in the school, and his boys only, by the way. He was on the track team as I was, and he was an excellent athlete, but it just never occurred to me that there was anything wrong with him because he was black. It was just another guy in the school, but that was fine. I never felt that I was inferior to them or superior to them.
So in general, did the other boys in the school feel the same way as you did, and they felt that intelligence came
I
over?
don't recall any situation in which boys denigrated one another because of anything related to their religion or their race.
Did you feel as if the other members in the army, did you feel they had the same sorts of attitudes you did towards?
Oh no, there were situations when the platoon consisted of a lot of Hispanic young men. And these Hispanic young men frequently spoke Spanish to one another. And the white young men did not like this. So there was an element of superiority, of xenophobia that existed in the platoon. But
did anybody ever stand up for the men who were?
as I recall, no.
Mm-hmm.
There were never any fights among the troops. It was certainly if you fought with one another, that would get you in jail in the army. So you just didn't do that.
Yeah, and do you feel that living in a house with two women changed your, or sort of directed your views towards women's rights later, compared to as if there was another man in the house?
I think it probably made me more tolerant of feminism than most men who grow up with a father. My father abandoned my mother before I was born, and I seem to recall that my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a pretty strict guy and not terribly easy to live with. So I got the impression probably that men were not highly regarded by women.
When I was growing up, women were very confined to being teachers, nurses, and housewives. There really was very little open to us. We were not equally educated. There certainly were many more men in college than women. And there were no doctors, there were no women lawyers. We could not own land. We could not own monies. We could not work on the stock market. We were terribly confined. I remember as the women's movement began to emerge, that my personal time of adjusting to the movement and saying what I thought came when my husband sent me with the car to a gas station so that a minor thing could be fixed. The mechanic was a big, rough guy who talked to me as if I was a toddler and put me down and tried to sell me with all sorts of stuff, that the car needed this and the car. He talked to me like I was a halfwit, and I got angrier and angrier. And I finally, in my Declaration of Independence, said to him, "Listen, mister, just because you have something between your legs doesn't mean you've got anything in your head." And I drove away. I became part of the women's movement in supporting it, and later on, with my daughter, we did go to Washington to support Roe versus Wade. That was a very exciting and definitive thing for both of us. I said when I was young, I would never wear an apron because to me that was the uniform of servitude, and I was never going to do it. And I didn't until at 83, this past Christmas, I bought an apron just to keep my clothes clean. As far as social issues go, both Peter and I have also been very supportive of the lesbian and homosexual and that community. The reason for my support is that my sister, who was a very famous musician, the first woman to conduct at City Opera, a woman who went to Germany to conduct there, and I have felt always that if you are lucky enough to find someone to love, it doesn't matter who it is, as long as they're not a mass murderer, and that loving someone is a positive thing. Judy never came out.
Mm-hmm.
For her sexual orientation was a very secretive thing. And when it was exposed, it was at her deathbed. My sister, unfortunately, died young, just before her 50th birthday. And at her funeral, her partner was very open about her relationship with my sister. And that's when my parents were totally aware of my sister's sexual orientation.
So she never participated in any movements?
No, it was all very, very in the closet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did your parents have any other reaction towards her after they realized?
There was a big difference between the way my parents treated my sister and me. Because my sister did not marry and did not have children, obviously, they supported her professionally in every way. For me, when I chose to become a conductor, when I chose music, when I chose anything that wasn't housewife, my parents were very against it. And they chided me continually because I wanted to do more than being a wife and mother.
And why do you feel that they treated her differently than you?
Because she wasn't married.
Okay.
So she didn't have the obligation of a husband and children.
So do you feel as though there was that appreciation for a woman if she got a job and worked professionally, if she didn't have a family, but once she had a family, then she was obligated to go and be at
Exactly.
home? Okay.
Once she had a family, my father was very, I wouldn't say vindictive, very disparaging about women and their role in society. They were only good for one thing: sex and family, and they should stay there and not put their heads into any other thing. He was terrible. He loved women, but they had a role, and my dad was determined that they stay in that role.
Mm-hmm.
My mother never had a thought in her head that my father did not initiate. She only said things he said. She only voted the way he told her to. If he said jump, she jumped. For that reason, I had a very, very difficult time growing up because I did not want to be like my mother, who, as I said, never seemed to fight for herself, except financially, because my father held all the purse strings and was very, very, very close with his funds. So my mother finally decided that she had to earn money, and she became a dressmaker, and people came to the house. She didn't go out of the house. My father wouldn't have endured that. But women came to the house, and my mother would do hems and things like that. And she finally had some money of her own. I remember in my parents' life when they decided that they were going to merge. It was a big deal. It was very funny, actually. They merged their accounts finally toward the end.
Going back on Nana and Baba, did she ever resent Baba taking the reign on her life in general?
She never expressed that.
Mm-hmm.
After my father died, my mother did two major things, and I'm talking about a woman who is 91. Because my mother was the eldest of 11 living children, she had to leave school very early in her life to go out and work because my grandmother was a widow. So my grandmother had 11 children. My mother was the oldest. And she went to work, and she regretted all her life the fact that she never got her high school diploma. After my father died, at age 91, my mother took a correspondence course and got her high school diploma. She was very proud of that. And the other thing she did was, that year during elections, my mother said, "Who are you going to vote for?" And when I told her, she said, "Well, I'm going to vote for that person too, because this is your world, and I want to contribute to your world." I have hopes for women, and I have hopes for our country, and I have hopes for the political situation as well. And I believe that in the past several years we have gone in the right direction, and I hope we continue to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Let us hope that things work out for the best.
Do you have any final words?
Only that I am pleased that I have lived long enough, and hopefully will continue to live enough longer to see how my progeny, my beautiful granddaughters, turn out, how their careers will blossom, or even to find out what careers they choose to get into. I'm pleased that I have been able to enjoy being with Jenna and help her deal with her issues, primarily diabetes. I'm hopeful that the political situation in our country will not deteriorate into something resembling an oligarchy, primarily for the sake of our grandchildren and their children and so forth. But I'm satisfied with the life that I have led. I have made mistakes, regretful ones to be sure, but overall, I have conducted my life honorably, except for a few occasions, and I hope that I will be remembered for being basically a good person and a helpful one.
Amen. One day I just needed my hair trimmed, and I went into a close beauty salon. And I noticed that I was the only white person in there, and that everybody, also all of the people who were doing the hair, were black. But I said, no, this doesn't matter. I'm going to prove that I know. And so I sat down, and a woman worked on me for a good long time. I didn't understand why she was working for so long, but I sat back and I enjoyed it. When I got home, I noticed, and so did Peter, that my hair was sort of shiny and glistening. And we tried to get a comb through it, and we couldn't even put a comb through it because it was glued to my head. I had to shampoo 5 times in order to get the goop out of the hair that had been placed there. And when I finally could comb my hair, I had come to the realization that although black women and I were sisters, we had different hair.